Welcome to the deep dive. We've got some really interesting stuff to dig into today. A whole bunch of ideas centered around how to boost your energy and just feel better overall. It seems like the Happiness Project is kind of a central theme in what you sent over. So think of this as us diving deep into all that for you, pulling out the most practical and useful bits that you could actually put to use.
Exactly. And, our goal here is pretty simple, to take all those core ideas from what you've shared and turn them into real strategies for you so you can actually feel more energetic and happier in your daily life. We're all about clarity and getting right to the heart of what matters.
And just to give you a roadmap of where we're headed, we're going to be exploring those main themes that brought up with a real focus on concrete actions you can take. Kind of like, what can you actually do to recharge both your physical and mental batteries?
Yeah, like a practical toolkit.
Right, exactly. So the first thing that really jumped out at me was this connection between how much energy you have and how happy you feel.
It's really interesting, isn't it, how those two are so intertwined? The central idea here is that feeling more energetic and being happier, they're not just separate things. They actually feed into each other. There's this positive feedback loop where feeling happy can give you more energy, and having more energy can actually help you do the things that make you happy.
It makes perfect sense, right? When you have more energy, you're more likely to be active, spend time with loved ones, pursue your hobbies, all things that can contribute to happiness. And I think the source even mentioned how feeling energetic can boost your confidence, which in turn can make you feel even better.
Absolutely. It's like a domino effect. And it's so true. When you're dragging and exhausted, even things you normally enjoy can feel like a chore.
Oh, I know that feeling. It's like even planning a fun weekend outing can feel overwhelming when you're just completely drained.
Right. And thinking bigger picture for a second, your source touches on this whole idea of New Year's resolutions. So many people make them, often related to health and well-being. It shows we all want to feel better, right? But then a lot of those resolutions, they just fizzle out.
It happens to the best of us.
Yeah. So this happiness project approach, by focusing on energy levels first, it might actually be a more grounded and effective way to create lasting change instead of just setting these big abstract goals.
I see what you mean. It's more about building a solid foundation.
Exactly.
And it smartly breaks down energy into two main areas: what's happening with your body and what's going on in your mind. So let's start with boosting that physical energy. And it seems like a pretty obvious place to start. Sleep.
It really is foundational. And what's striking is how sleep-deprived our society has become. Your source mentioned how many Americans make New Year's resolutions. And while it doesn't give a specific number for that year, it's pretty well known that a lot of those resolutions are about health, which ties back to sleep.
Right. Getting enough sleep is like health 101.
Totally. But then millions of us are still struggling to get even close to the recommended 7 to 8 hours a night.
It's almost become a badge of honor to be sleep deprived, hasn't it? Like, oh, I'm so busy, I only slept 4 hours last night.
Yeah, like it's a sign of productivity or something.
Exactly. But the research is so clear on how vital sleep is for our well-being. It's not just about feeling rested. It impacts our mood, our ability to focus, our energy levels. Everything.
Oh, absolutely. The source you shared had some really interesting findings about how directly sleep impacts our day-to-day mood. There was even one study that suggested getting just 1 extra hour of sleep regularly could have a more positive impact on your daily happiness than getting a $60,000 raise.
Wow, that's a really powerful comparison. It really puts things in perspective.
It does, right? It makes you think, okay, maybe I need to reevaluate my priorities a little bit.
For sure. And, the fact that the average adult is sleeping significantly less now than they did a century ago just shows how things have shifted. Our always-on culture, the pressure to be constantly productive, it's all taking a toll.
Definitely. And I think it's really easy to get caught up in that, to feel like you constantly need to be doing something.
Totally. But, what I found interesting is that the author's initial goal around sleep was actually quite simple. It was just to turn the lights out earlier.
Going back to basics.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds so basic, but how often do we actually do that? We're scrolling on our phones, watching just one more show, or trying to squeeze in one more task.
Right. It's like our brains are wired to keep going. And all times, I feel like actually going to bed can almost feel harder than staying up.
I know what you mean. It's like you're finally relaxing, and then you get to bed.
Yeah, but like you said, we've got our routines. Plus, there's always that little voice saying, just one more episode.
Oh, yeah, that voice is a troublemaker. But, the author found that making a conscious effort to stick to that earlier bedtime, even when tempted by late-night distractions, really paid off.
And that's so encouraging to hear, that even with those temptations, it's still possible to make positive changes.
Exactly. And the practical tips for better sleep in the source were great, like avoiding mentally stimulating activities right before bed, keeping your bedroom cool and dark, almost like a cave, the source said.
I like that imagery, the sleep cave.
Right. And then doing gentle stretches, minimizing bright light, even in the bathroom, just making sure the room is completely dark. These are all tangible things anyone can try.
They really are. And I thought it was interesting how the author talked about waking up in the middle of the night. That's something a lot of people struggle with.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And the strategies they found helpful, like taking slow, deep breaths, writing down to-do lists to quiet their mind, even wearing wool socks and their feet were cold. It just shows how personal sleep solutions can be.
You really have to figure out what works for you. And some of the things the author came up with were pretty clever, like starting their bedtime routine well before actually feeling tired.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Creating that wind-down time.
Exactly. And the 2-minute alarm clock trick, that's where you tell yourself you only have 2 more minutes before you absolutely have to get up.
It's like tricking your brain into falling back asleep.
Exactly. The little psychological nudge.
It's worth mentioning that the author did say they occasionally use sleep aids as well. It's just a good reminder that sometimes we need a little extra support, and that's totally okay.
It really is. We don't have to be perfect. But the overall message about making sleep a priority is so important, and the benefits are huge. More energy, better mood, fewer afternoon slumps, and just starting your day off on a good note.
I could agree more.
But despite all the great reasons to prioritize sleep, that lure of those quiet late-night hours, it's real.
That me time is precious.
It is. I struggle with that sometimes, too. I love that quiet time when everyone else is asleep. But the source mentioned how the author used a resolutions chart to remind themselves to stick to that earlier bedtime. It just shows that even with the best intentions, sometimes we need those little reminders to help us stick to our goals.
I think that's a great strategy. Visual cues can be really powerful.
Totally. Okay, let's move on to another big piece of the physical energy puzzle, exercise.
Yeah, let's get moving. The evidence is super strong on the benefits of exercise. And it's not just about physical health. Regular exercise helps us think more clearly, sleep better. It even helps delay dementia.
That's a pretty big list of benefits.
It is. And of course, a major plus is that it gives us more energy.
It almost seems counterintuitive, though, doesn't it? You'd think that working out would make you more tired. But the research really shows the opposite, especially if you spend a lot of time sitting down.
Yeah, it's like the more you move, the more energy you have. And, the statistic from your source about how something like 1/4 of American adults don't get any exercise at all, that's pretty alarming.
It is. And it makes you wonder, how much better could they be feeling if they were just a little bit more active?
Exactly. And the good news is that it doesn't take a ton of exercise to make a difference. The source highlighted a study that found that just 20 minutes of exercise, 3 times a week for 6 weeks, could boost energy levels in people who are chronically tired.
That's pretty doable, even for people with busy schedules.
Right. It's a really manageable starting point, and the potential benefits are significant.
I love how the author described their own journey of becoming a regular exerciser. They said it wasn't initially because they just loved working out. It was actually motivated by something totally external. They wanted to redecorate a room.
That's so funny. It just shows that sometimes an external motivator can be the thing that gets you going.
Exactly. It's like that initial spark to get the ball rolling.
And this brings up an interesting point about motivation, the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic is being driven by external rewards, like in that example, wanting to redecorate, while intrinsic motivation is when you do something because you genuinely enjoy it.
So, like working out because you love how it makes you feel.
Right. And the source pointed out that while those external rewards can be useful to get you started, they can also be tricky when it comes to activities that you ideally want to become enjoyable in their own right.
Because relying solely on those external rewards might not be sustainable in the long term, right?
Exactly. It's finding that balance. And, the father in that anecdote, he seemed to do a good job of navigating that.
He did. He provided that initial nudge without being too controlling. And speaking of exercise, the author also resolved to start strength training, which I think is a really important point.
Oh, yeah. Strength training is awesome.
Right. It helps build muscle, strengthen bones, and just improves overall body composition. It's important to include it in any fitness routine.
For sure. And it's funny how the author was initially hesitant about strength training. Then they got that recommendation from a friend for a really efficient 20-minute workout.
The no-sweat workout.
Yes. It just shows how valuable it is to be open to advice and trust the experiences of others. It's like what Daniel Gilbert talks about in his book, Stumbling on Happiness. Sometimes we have to let go of our preconceived notions and try things out.
And the author had such a positive experience with the trainer. And then their family members got involved too. It really shows the power of social support. and finding a type of exercise you actually enjoy.
Absolutely. And I remember the author initially hesitated about the cost, considering how short the workout was. That's a common concern.
It is, but in the end, the benefits seem to outweigh the cost. And, aside from structured workouts, the source really emphasized the benefits of just moving more throughout the day, especially walking.
Oh, I love walking.
It's so good for you. The rhythmic nature of it can be really relaxing, and it gives you a nice energy boost.
And it's accessible to almost everyone. You don't need any special equipment. You can do it almost anywhere.
Exactly. And, the idea of aiming for 10,000 steps a day has become really popular, and the author's experience using a pedometer to track their steps was really interesting.
What did they say about it?
Well, it wasn't just about passively tracking steps. It actually motivated them to walk more because they wanted to see that number go up.
Ah, so that desire to hit their goal actually got them moving more.
Exactly. It's almost like a game, but it works. And the author even talked about how it motivated them to walk to the dentist instead of driving, just to get those extra steps in.
That's commitment. It's a great example of what's called the Hawthorne effect. The simple act of knowing you're being observed or measured can influence your behavior.
And in this case, it had a really positive impact. It got the author moving more, even for everyday errands. And, it's not just about the physical benefits either. The source even connected walking with clearer thinking, referencing Nietzsche and the physiological impact of exercise on brain function.
I love that connection between the physical and mental.
Me too. And even that little bit of exposure to daylight during a walk can help regulate serotonin and dopamine levels, which are those key neurotransmitters that affect mood and energy.
So it's a win-win all around.
Totally. Okay, so now let's shift gears a bit and talk about boosting mental energy.
Sounds good.
Something that often drains our mental energy without us even fully realizing it is clutter.
Clutter can be such a drag, both the physical stuff around us and the mental clutter of all those unfinished tasks.
Exactly. The source talked about how household disorder can be this constant, low-level drain on our mental resources. And that statistic about the number of storage units doubling across the country, wow, it just shows how widespread this issue of clutter has become.
It's like we're drowning in stuff. And, that idea that getting rid of clutter could potentially reduce the amount of time we spend on housework by like 40%. That's huge.
It is. It reframes decluttering as a way to actually reclaim your time and mental energy.
Right. It's not just about being tidy. It's about freeing up mental space.
And the source made a really important distinction between visible clutter, like piles of papers or misplaced items, and what they called psychic clutter, those unfinished tasks and to-dos that just weigh on our minds.
That mental clutter can be the worst. You can't always see it, but you can definitely feel it.
It's like a constant low-level hum of stress.
Totally.
And it's kind of surprising that this whole idea of clutter hasn't gotten more attention in happiness research. The source mentioned that psychologists and philosophers haven't really focused on it that much, except for Samuel Johnson, who talked about the link between a well-ordered home and overall contentment. But then popular culture is obsessed with decluttering.
Right. Marie Kondo and all those decluttering shows. It seems like everyone's talking about it.
It really does. It makes you think maybe there's something to this intuitive understanding of how our surroundings affect us.
Definitely. And I think a lot of people can relate to the author's description of their own apartment. They talked about how much clutter they had.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot. And then they invoked the 10th commandment, do what ought to be done. That resonated with me. It's a good guiding principle when you're feeling overwhelmed by a task, like decluttering.
Oh, yeah. It's like, just take action, even if it's a small step.
And then they mentioned their mother's advice. Break it down into smaller chunks, do a little each day, and stay calm. It's classic advice, but so true for anything you're tackling.
It really is. Baby steps. And you know what I thought was helpful? How the author categorized different types of clutter.
Oh, yeah, that was interesting.
Like nostalgic clutter, stuff we keep out of guilt, freebies.
Things we think we might use someday.
Exactly. And then there's aspirational clutter, the things we keep because they represent some ideal version of ourselves. And of course, buyer's remorse clutter, the stuff we regret buying but can't quite bring ourselves to get rid of.
It helps to understand the different reasons why we hold on to things. It can make it easier to let go. And I thought it was funny how the author started by tackling their closets, and they used trash bags. It's like no fancy organizing containers, just straight into the trash bag.
Sometimes the simplest approach is the best. And, the author talked about how liberating it felt to finally get rid of clothes they weren't wearing. It's easy to get caught up in those little self-deceptions about what we might wear someday.
So true. And the authors even talked about how exhilarating it felt. It really underscores how much of a mental burden clutter can be. And they ended up decluttering other areas, too, like their hangers, shopping bags, sock drawer.
It's like once you get started, it creates this momentum.
Exactly. And then they had all these great tips, like focusing on those dump zones in our homes, the dining table, kitchen counter, that chair in the bedroom where everything seems to land.
Oh, I know those zones all too well.
Don't we all? And then labeling cords and instruction manuals so you can actually find them.
That's a game changer.
And then there's the virtual move strategy, where you pretend you're moving and only pack the things you would actually take with you. It forces you to be really discerning about what you truly need and value.
I love that idea.
Me too. And the author also had this rule, only keep it if you're still using it.
Sounds reasonable.
Right. But then they also admitted to having some exceptions for sentimental items. It's a good reminder that decluttering doesn't have to be this rigid all-or-nothing thing. You can be flexible and adapt it to your own needs and values.
Absolutely. It's about what works for you.
And, the anecdote about their college roommate and the empty shelf was really powerful. It's this idea that having a little bit of empty space, even just a single shelf, can create a sense of visual calm and possibility.
Oh, I love that. It's like a little breath of fresh air in your space.
And then there was that challenge of managing children's toys. They applied the eighth commandment, identify the problem. So often we just try to muddle through without clearly defining the issue. But by simply stating a problem, you can often open up the possibility for a solution.
I like that, the name it to tame it.
Yeah, exactly. And in this case, it led to those toy canisters, which not only solved the storage problem, but also ended up looking really nice.
So it was functional and aesthetically pleasing.
Totally. And then there's the four thermometer syndrome. Remember that story? The author couldn't find a thermometer when they needed one, and it turned out they had 4 of them, scattered throughout the house. It's a perfect illustration of how decluttering can actually make it easier to find the things you need because everything has its designated place.
It's like that feeling of, everything is in order. I know exactly where to find what I need. It's so satisfying.
It really is. And the source talked about that satisfaction of putting things back in their designated spot. It's a small pleasure, but it definitely adds up.
Those little wins throughout the day make a difference. And, the 1-minute rule is a great way to stay on top of clutter. If something takes less than a minute to do, just do it right away.
Yeah, that's a good one. It prevents those little tasks from piling up. And then there's the evening tidy up. Just taking a few minutes each evening to put things back in their place, clear off surfaces, it makes such a difference.
I do that too. It helps me feel calm and collected before bed.
Right. And you wake up to a more peaceful environment, which is such a nice way to start the day. I'm realizing that although the initial thought of decluttering can feel daunting, the payoff is huge.
Totally. It's one of those things that feels much better once you've actually done it. And the author found that even without a lot of praise from others, the personal benefits were so significant, it was enough to keep them going. Now let's talk about those unfinished tasks. That's another big source of mental drain.
Oh yeah, those nagging to-dos that just hang over your head.
Exactly. And your source compared them to buzzing bees, constantly buzzing around in your mind and taking up space.
That's such a good analogy. It's like they're always there in the background, draining your energy and creating this feeling of guilt.
And sometimes, just the thought of tackling them can feel so overwhelming.
Absolutely. The author talked about creating this massive 5-page to-do list. It included everything, even the little things, which I thought was smart.
So they could get those quick wins and build momentum.
Exactly. And then they had examples of things they actually completed, getting that skin cancer check, cleaning the windows, backing up the computer, paying bills, finally getting those shoes repaired. It just shows that it's possible to make progress, even if it feels slow at times.
And those little accomplishments add up. It's encouraging to see those items crossed off the list.
Totally. And then there were those frustrating boomerang errands.
What were those again?
It's like those tasks you think you've taken care of, but then they come back, like that dentist appointment that needed to be rescheduled, or the broken wall light that required another repair visit. It's just a reminder that some things require persistent effort. And then there are those ongoing tasks, like putting on sunscreen every day or flossing. They're not one-and-done things. They require ongoing habit changes, which can be tough.
Yeah, consistency is key with those. And, the author mentioned how sometimes it's helpful to focus on the more immediate motivators, like preventing wrinkles with sunscreen or avoiding bad breath with flossing.
Then sometimes the long-term health benefits just aren't enough to keep us motivated on a daily basis.
Especially when those benefits are far off in the future.
Exactly. And, the source really emphasized that often the hardest part of a task is simply deciding to do it.
So true. It's the getting started that's the toughest part.
Like the author talked about this 48-word email that they'd been putting off for weeks. It was such a small task, but it had been looming over them. And they finally did it, and it felt amazing.
It's like a weight lifted. And it ties back to that idea that taking action, even on small things, can have a ripple effect on our mood and energy levels.
It's a reminder that sometimes those little things aren't so little after all. Okay, so finally, let's talk about acting more energetic, even when you might not feel like it.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting one. It's like fake it till you make it for energy levels.
Right, and the research actually backs this up. Your source even mentioned the 12th commandment, act the way I want to feel. Our physical actions can actually influence our emotional state. It's like if you act more energetic, you might actually start to feel more energetic.
I can see that. It's like how smiling, even if you don't feel happy, can actually lift your mood.
Exactly. It's tricking your brain a little bit. And there was a study about Botox that showed that people who couldn't frown as easily because of the Botox actually reported feeling happier. It's pretty wild.
It is. It's like if you can't physically express sadness, maybe your brain starts to believe it's not there.
Right, our bodies and minds are so connected. And the author quoted William James, who said, action seems to follow feeling. But really, action and feeling go together. And by regulating the action, which is under the more direct control of the will, we can indirectly regulate the feeling, which is not.
That's a great quote. It's like we can take control of our actions, and that can have a knock-on effect on our emotions.
Exactly. And, the author talked about how they use this fake it till you feel it approach with some success, like they would deliberately walk at a faster pace or consciously put more energy into their voice during phone calls.
It's like if you act as if you have energy, maybe your body will catch up.
Right. And they even mentioned pushing themselves to initiate playtime with their kids, even when they felt tired. And they found that once they got started, they actually started to feel more energized. It's about breaking that inertia of feeling sluggish.
That's such a great reminder. Sometimes we have to push ourselves a little bit, and then the energy follows. So at the end of that first month of the Happiness Project, the author reflected on how they were feeling. They said it was still early to tell definitively if they were happier overall, but they did report feeling more alert and calm and less overwhelmed.
That's a good start.
It is. And, the author also talked about rewarding themselves, even with just a check mark on a list, to reinforce those new resolutions. It's like acknowledging and celebrating those small wins.
Those little acknowledgments are so important. But, they also acknowledge that maintaining those new habits, like keeping things tidy, was an ongoing effort. It's not like you declutter once and then you're done forever.
It's a constant process, right?
Exactly. And the author even compared tidying to a Sisyphean task.
Oh, wow. That's a great analogy. Like you're always pushing that boulder up the hill.
It's so true. But the hope is that those small, consistent habits, like the 1-minute rule and the evening tidy up, can help prevent things from getting totally out of control again.
It's about building those sustainable systems. And, in the end, the author was really surprised by how much satisfaction they got from creating order in their environment. It wasn't just about the physical space. It had a real impact on their mental state. And that final quote from Samuel Johnson really summed it up well. To do nothing is in every man's power. To be busy is a great privilege. It is much pleasanter to have life to wear out than to rust out.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes those seemingly small, everyday efforts are the things that make the biggest difference in our overall happiness.
So to wrap up for you today, we've really explored some key areas from your sources, all about boosting your energy and feeling better, prioritizing sleep, incorporating regular exercise, tackling clutter, and even just acting more energetic even when you don't necessarily feel like it.
And remember, these aren't just abstract ideas. They're concrete, actionable steps, all taken directly from the material you shared with us.
Exactly. We've given you a practical toolkit to start experimenting with.
So for you, our listener, here's a question to ponder. Which of these strategies resonates most with you right now? What's one small step, even a tiny one, that you could take today to start putting it into practice? Because remember, even the smallest consistent actions can add up to big changes in your energy and happiness levels.
And we'd love to hear from you. If you have any other questions or if you want to share your own experiences as you try out these strategies, feel free to reach out.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
See you next time.